So it's been about 6 months since the release of Stalker 2, and the game launched to a mixed reception to say the least, and it hasn't exactly been getting much better over time. While myself and many others had initially praised the game for its expansive open world, detailed animations, and immersive atmosphere, it wasn't long after that the cracks began to show. Before I get into it, I want to note that I am keeping this review spoiler-free for those of you who haven't played or completed the game yet. If you do end up enjoying this video, or agree with what I say here, please leave a like on the video, as it helps me out a lot and lets me keep making videos like this and others. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. So Stalker 2 is, while an impressive game on the surface, also mired in issues that far surpass the shortcomings of even the original games, which are well known for their bugginess and lack of polish. See, for the first many hours I played, I encountered little to no issues aside from the performance being a bit choppy in places. But this was mainly for two reasons. One, I stayed on the path of the scripted main quest, and two, because it seems like the developers intentionally put more focus on the early part of the game, which is something I'm going to speculate on in a little bit. But first, let's talk about Stalker 2's iteration of the zone. So, the Lesser Zone. The first area the player will visit is packed full of interesting NPCs, side quests, and detailed locations with lots of things to do. For me at least, it seemed like a dream come true, at least at first. But then I got to the Cordon, which of course I had to visit since it was such an iconic area from the original game. The first thing I noticed was how lackluster the level felt, and just how empty everything was. There really wasn't anything to do there aside from one or two very simple side quests. I thought that perhaps I just explored the area too quickly since the game didn't actually tell me to go there yet, I just went on my own. But still, for an open world game it felt uncannily barren. But I shrugged it off. The rest of the game was pretty cool thus far, so I thought surely the Cordon must be the exception and not the rule. I regret to inform you that I couldn't have been more wrong. Stalker 2 is an empty game. Take a look at this image here, which shows how many side quests exist in each region. Note how the Lesser Zone, which again is the first area the player visits, has 13 side quests, by far the most, with the Garbage being the second major area the player visits, boasting 10 coming in close behind. Then you have the rest of the map. There are hardly any in the other central areas of the zone. There's 6 in the Zaton region, which really isn't a lot when you consider how big it is, and then 0 in the northern parts of the zone as well as many others. There's also a very finite amount of dynamic quests to be received from traders. In fact, most traders won't give you any dynamic quests at all for some reason. Stalker 2, unfortunately, is yet another entry into modern gaming that uses the concept of open world as an excuse for the game to be quite empty. It has massive play spaces with little actual content. What really ashames me though is that unlike other newer open world games like Halo Infinite for example, Stalker 2's open world actually has many parts of it that are genuinely interesting. Abandoned shacks, industrial facilities, former military bases, unique geographical features created by the ravages of the zone. All of them are criminally underused. Take the Poppy Field for example. This area was featured heavily in Stalker 2's marketing, and it even has a pretty decent side quest or two related to it with some rather unique anomalies being present. Beyond just gameplay, from an aesthetic standpoint, this place is, much like the rest of Stalker 2, absolutely breathtaking to look at. But why is it that after those 2 tiny side quests are completed, there is literally no reason to go to this area ever again? In fact, it might as well be locked off or behind an invisible barrier because there is nothing. I say again, nothing whatsoever to do here. And it's also a pretty good portion of the Lesser Zone region. While I understand why it's an area that the player is meant to avoid, and I wouldn't want to see it turn into a shooting gallery, the devs could have done something with it to make it a bit more interesting in the long term. Maybe they could have made it so that rare artifacts that are exclusive to the Poppy Field spawn here, which would give the player a reason to risk going into it again. Maybe put in a few more quests where scientists or other stalkers are drawn to the area due to its charm. Put in a teleportation anomaly that allows a sort of free fast travel from some faraway point in the zone, but puts you in the middle of the anomalous poppies, a sort of risky trade-off, so to say. They literally could have done anything but make it a throwaway location like it is in the actual game. Now let's talk about some of the other locations. The Truck Cemetery has made its way into Stalker 2. Many fans of Anomaly or other COC-based mods will recognize this one. I myself was stoked to see it appear on the map, as Truck Cemetery is one of my favorite levels from the Call of Chernobyl mods. The only problem is, once again, you go to it, this massive area with loads of amazing scenery, only to find that it's completely deserted. There is no reason to explore the Truck Cemetery. In fact, the entire area the truck cemetery is in, called Yantar, has 0 side quests. Now let's take a look at another location, but this one's brand new to Stalker 2, the Burnt Forest. When I first saw this area, I was intrigued. Why did the forest burn down? Who started the fire? We didn't start the fire. So what happened to this place? Unfortunately, as far as I can remember, we don't really get much of an answer to that. In fact, this location plays very little role in the game at all, and if it wasn't there, Stalker 2 wouldn't be much different. There are only 2 side quests, which, like most of the side quests in this game, are fairly basic and don't really involve much, just kinda go here, shoot that, go there, talk to this person, and that's it. Last but not least, I wanted to talk about the northern reaches of the zone. There are progressively less quests to do the later you get into the game, so much so that the late game ends up feeling incredibly rushed. Both Pripyat and Jupiter have a combined total of 0 side quests, Yanov only has 1, and the Red Forest supposedly has 2, but despite the map marker telling me there was a side activity available, I couldn't get it to work no matter what I tried. It's such a shame because, like a lot of the rest of the zone, there is so much detail in these locations. So many buildings to search in, stashes to find, bodies to loot, and just different locations to explore. But there's absolutely no purpose to any of it at all. Stashes contain the same type of loot. For the most part, unique items in said stashes are, unlike the original Stalker games, few and far between. While the different traps and puzzles required to get to some of those stashes are definitely a really cool new feature, they all end up feeling relatively pointless in the end, which is a huge takeaway. The entire later part of the game, and throughout much of the mid-game, I felt like I was just rushing myself along to get to the next area. There was no incentive for me to take my time and explore like there was in the originals. To make matters worse, that's kind of what's in the good parts of Stalker 2's open world. Other areas are just full of nothingness. Here, look at the map again. I've circled in green roughly where all the action in this game happens. The rest of the map is pretty much unused, save for running through certain parts of it here or there, and that's something you're going to be doing a lot of. Running. There is so much running in this game, except when you run out of energy. Then it's time to down some water or an energy drink to replenish that stamina. Oh, and energy drinks also make you hungry, which depletes your stamina for some reason, so better carry a dozen or so cans of canned food, otherwise you're gonna be very, very tired. The developers, for some reason, in their pursuit of making this massive open world, did not account for the fact that they were making a massive open world. The player's stamina is inadequate, to say the least. I actually did a test where I went on the Rookie Village in Stalker 2, and then I went to the same exact spot in the original game. I unequipped any stamina buffing or debuffing artifacts, I made the carry weight of both characters exactly the same, and I kept their hunger at the same levels, and found that the player actually has slightly more stamina in the original Stalker, when the game world wasn't as big, wasn't completely open world, and didn't require loads of backtracking from place A to place B. Needless to say, Stalker 2 is a giant walking simulator. So before, I highlighted places on the map with a lot going on. Now I'm going to show the parts where there's hardly anything at all again. The vast majority of Stalker 2's regions have little to nothing going on in them, and this is further exacerbated by the extreme lack of side quests outside of the Lesser Zone and Garbage regions. Now let's talk about the A-Life, or the complete and total lack thereof. In my original Stalker 2 review, I had said that while it wasn't as good as the OG games, it was still there. I was wrong. What I thought was A-Life turned out to be scripted encounters that were appearing at incredibly awkward times because the game was bugging out. And one thing I want to touch on briefly here. When this game came out, it was broken. The more you played, the worse it got. Some quests were straight up impossible to complete because of how broken the game was. NPCs wouldn't spawn, critical dialogue options that would further the quest wouldn't appear, doors that were supposed to open would just remain locked. You get the idea. While I do want to stress, in my experience at least, with over 100 hours in the game, most, emphasis on most, of those issues have been fixed. But Stalker 2 still launched in an unacceptable alpha state. That being said, let's talk about that A-Life. While it was advertised by GSC that Stalker 2 was meant to contain an A-Life 2.0 system, no such system exists, at least not in the version of Stalker 2 we're all playing right now. You see, Originally, the Steam page for Stalker 2 listed A-Life 2.0 as being a feature. This is that original page. It has since been altered, and I seem to remember but can't find a source, that GSC claimed the A-Life 2.0 being listed as one of the features being a mistake made by some intern. That was their explanation. Pretty big mistake to make, and I also should note that today, right now as of the making of this video, you can still go to the official Stalker 2 website and see on the FAQ page that GSC still mentioned A-Life 2.0, which describes, and I quote, "factions and mutants fighting for living space, migrating, capturing new places, or retreating to safer areas," end quote. This is not present in the game at all. Any kind of ambient AI is exceedingly rare and usually only spawns in either a designated spot where they just stand guard, or sometimes they spawn about 50 feet away from the player, and that's being generous. Not only does this come off as dishonest and scummy on the part of GSC, but it also doesn't translate too well into gameplay. To add to this, the AI in the game is just horrendous. They hardly take cover, mutants just blindly charge in at you and have almost no unique behaviors whatsoever, and every 15 to 30 seconds or so, it's almost guaranteed the human NPCs will throw a grenade. The AI in this game are so easily telegraphed, so stupid, and so lazily designed at worst, or not functioning properly at best, that it makes the game very boring and turns it into less of a matter of strategy and actual tactics, and more into a matter of how many times you can spam grenades and health packs. Stalker 2's AI are laughably dumb to the point of where more often than not they can be found just shooting at walls, ignoring the player until they get right up in front of them, or otherwise doing stupid immersion-breaking things that make no sense. Now let's talk about the massive amount of missing features. While I've already touched on A-Life quite a bit, there are other smaller things that just aren't present in Stalker 2 that were there in the originals. The first one being weapons. Stalker 2 hardly has any pistols, only 4 to be exact. Compare this to the original Stalker games having 10, over double the amount, and that's not counting any of the unique versions of those weapons. While Stalker 2 does feature quite a few new rifles, it's also missing a decent amount of old ones, as well as lacking specialty weapons like the Bulldog 6 grenade launcher. Then you have the lack of very basic equipment. I don't see too many people talking about this one. Items like radio protectant, which does what it sounds like, and antibiotics, which allowed the player to survive in a mission if they were too far away from cover, are completely absent from Stalker 2. Even more basic gear like binoculars and of course night vision are also missing, meaning that you can't get a better look at enemies from a distance to strategically plan out your actions like you could in the previous games. On the topic of seeing things, the nights in Stalker 2 are way too bright and thus pose no real danger compared to the daytime. To add to this, for some reason the day-night cycle in Stalker 2 is fast. I mean, real fast. In Stalker 2, a full day takes a little over 1 hour of real time. In the original Stalker Call of Pripyat, the day-night cycle is significantly longer. Then you have, in addition to the missing A-Life, night vision, weapons, and basic AI competency, there's also the removal of lootable mutant parts. I had heard that GSC plans to add these in a future update, but I mean, come on, this game was in development for at least 6 years, most of which was before the events of 2022, I should mention. There is no excuse for this amount of cut content and missing or broken features. So on top of all of that, basic movement mechanics are missing too. In the original Stalker series, you could peek and lean around corners and low crouch to take better cover. In Stalker 2, low crouching is completely non-existent, and while peeking and leaning is still a thing, it's only able to be done so when a weapon is drawn, or should I say when a firearm is drawn. You can't do it with a knife, you can't do it with a bolt, and perhaps most crucially, you can't do it with grenades, which was a pretty big feature in the originals for obvious reasons. Now in Stalker 2, if you want to throw a grenade around a corner, you have to step out from around the corner and completely expose yourself. Great. Before I move on to the next section, I want to talk about A-Life and enemy combat one last time. As I mentioned, so-called A-Life is exceedingly rare. This is especially the case with mutants. To make matters worse, the only mutant you regularly encounter is the Bloodsucker. These things were rare in the original Stalker games, but for some reason in Stalker 2, they seem to be one of the most common enemies around. you'd think that it was the only mutant in the zone sometimes. They come from everywhere, and let me tell you, they are not fun to fight in Stalker 2 at all. In the original, bloodsuckers were a sort of special, almost mini-boss-like enemy that were a minor challenge. In Stalker 2, these guys will just knock you on your ass again and again while you spam medkits and pray you hit something. I see what they were trying to do, and if the bloodsuckers were a little bit less common and didn't knock you on the ground almost every time they hit you, it could be fun. But unfortunately, well, they do. Almost every single time they hit you, your character will enter the same monotonous animation time and time again, and then have to spend some time getting up. Bloodsuckers in Stalker 2 suck. In fact, most of the combat in this game sucks. AI become hyper-predictable real fast, mutants other than bloodsuckers hardly seem to exist, including the normal, more natural mutants like dogs, boars, and fleshes, and thus all of that directly contributes to making the already barren-feeling zone feel even more barren. I can't believe they had 6+ years to develop this, and this is all that came of it, but anyways, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the story. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that I was going to keep this relatively spoiler-free, and that's still going to apply here. Speaking of which, if you're still with me, hit that like button and comment "We want a life" down below. But now, the story. It's mediocre for the most part. While there certainly are aspects that I think are pretty cool, most of it feels incredibly anticlimactic. Characters from the previous games make a return, which is nice, but a lot of those characters either act nothing like their previous selves, or are just killed off with little fanfare or impact on the overall story. Honestly, half of Stalker 2's story feels like a disjointed mess of filler. There's this new faction called Spark that are basically these nomadic science types, and they do almost nothing. Then there's the Ward, which is basically duty but more extreme. Then you have the IPSF. They're really just stand-ins for the military because given current events, GSC didn't want the actual military in the game because reasons, I guess. It's weird, though, and it's inconsistent because throughout the game, many NPCs will still refer to the IPSF as either the army or the military directly, so yeah, ultimately they serve no purpose other than to be generic soldiers running through the zone. I honestly had a hard time telling the difference between them and the Ward though, since both wear similar modernish military outfits and both were constantly shooting at me throughout my first playthrough. Duty, Freedom, and Monolith, of course, all make a return, with the former two being almost completely inconsequential to the storyline, especially Duty. Freedom has... okay, just skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want to hear a very minor spoiler, but Freedom has taken over Duty's former base in Rostock and turned it into a hipster bar and marketplace. Duty now inhabits the old cement factory in Jupiter. You know, that small little complex from Call of Pripyat? Yeah, just a tiny little base with maybe 24 or so Duty soldiers standing around, because reasons, I guess. You can't really interact with them, and General Veronin from the original game is there, but says nothing of consequence. In fact, I couldn't find a single quest that was related to Duty at all in any significant way, and there wasn't much to do with Freedom either. The mercenary faction still exists, but they're more of just a band of travelers, so they're essentially just loners with slightly different outfits. In fact, most of the times I don't even recognize them as mercenaries. Then you of course have the ecologists, and they're much of the same thing, and that's pretty much it. None of the nuance with the old factions exists within Stalker 2. Most of the story seems like it was rewritten halfway through and then never proofread, because there are loads of moments with many different characters that really don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Characters' motivations are often unclear at best and cookie-cutter generic at worst. There's a big organization that has a big base. I'm being vague here to avoid spoilers, but they're important for all of 5 minutes. There's a man that looks suspiciously like Ukrainian President Zelensky, at least in my opinion. Actually, there's kind of 2 of them. And then there's another guy that looks like Putin. I don't know if that was supposed to be some kind of social commentary or not, but whatever. So, yeah. Later in the game, another important character from the OG games comes back, and he's well, spoiler territory here, but his story arc isn't very good. It kind of flips everything on its head, but not in a good way. I'm just gonna say, the story was kind of terrible. I finished Stalker with the s.t.a.l.k.e.r ending, and I felt empty. It wasn't a good ending at all. I had experienced the same thing when I beat Metro Exodus for the first time as well, and I had found out that I just got the bad ending for that game, so I took to YouTube to see if the other endings for Stalker 2 were any better than the ending that I got. Maybe my opinion would be changed, and, well, they're not. They're certainly a bit crazy and creative in some ways, but none of them are particularly compelling, at least not in my opinion. Of course, that may change, and I am a bit negatively biased given the rest of the issues of the game, but that's that. So, Stalker 2, disappointment of the decade, right next to Halo Infinite. Note, I said next to, not ahead of or beating. Halo Infinite is still a lot worse, but Stalker 2 at the end of the day is a game I have incredibly mixed feelings about, leaning more towards negative. There's a lot of things I love about this game. Like I said, the open world is cool if there was a reason to interact with it, but right now it feels like a walking simulator. So at the end of the day, would I recommend Stalker 2? No, absolutely not, especially not in its current state. The reality of it is, GSC has sold us a very early access beta at a premium price, and there's still no real word on the DLC that was meant to come out, so I guess all of us silly fools who bought the special edition of the game that came with said DLC are out of luck now. And that multiplayer mode that was meant to be added post-launch, yeah, to my knowledge, we haven't heard anything about that either. It's looking like the Curb Your Hype for Stalker 2 video I did a couple of years ago, which, by the way, I got a lot of hate for, unfortunately aged pretty well. And I really didn't want it to. I think I even said in that video that I wanted to be proven wrong about my skepticism for this game, but yeah, sometimes I hate being right. At the end of the day, Stalker 2 is what I'd call a solid 4 out of 10 game. It's better than any of the live service slop out there, that's for sure, but that's also not saying much. It even does have a lot of cool features that I really liked, like the slick animations, the ability to play guitar as small as that is, it's just a nice little touch, and then of course the awesome locations. I had made a video ages ago criticizing Halo Infinite's open world campaign, and one of my biggest critiques was that its locations were repetitive and the map was boring and there was really nothing unique about it. Well, Stalker 2 doesn't have this problem. It does actually have a lot of unique locations that could be truly amazing if they had working A-Life and more scripted and dynamic quests. Having played mods like IWP, Call of the Zone, and Anomaly for about a decade now, I can kind of see how the future of Stalker 2 is unfortunately gonna be on the backs of modders. And before somebody goes and says, well, that's what the original games were, no, they weren't. While the original Stalker games do have extensive mod support and some really awesome fan-made creations for them, those original games can still stand up on their own. Stalker 2, with its lacking basic features and functionality, as well as, I don't know, the A-Life that made the original game so good in the first place, doesn't do it for me right now. It doesn't stand up on its own. Ultimately, Stalker 2 feels a lot more like a platform for modders to build on, rather than an actual game, and that's wrong on so many levels. They sell game development kits out there. There are prefabricated assets and even levels that you can buy. If I wanted one of those, I would have bought one, but I bought a game. I expect it to work and be feature complete out of the box, but Stalker 2, like so many other modern releases, isn't. It shouldn't be up to modders and fans to make the game for the developers. And it's with a heavy heart I say all this because for a long time I've always loved GSC. I loved what they put out with the original games, and I even love Clear Sky, which a lot of people hate. Hell, I've even played their oldest FPS, Codename Outbreak, just because I was such a big fan of them. I didn't play it when it came out, of course, I just played it afterwards because I wanted to see what came before Stalker and kinda inspired it. But Stalker 2 is ultimately a huge letdown and a huge stain on GSC's reputation. It was literally the last game I had any hope for, as I've seen the modern games industry become a circus of incomplete broken launches with day one DLC, which is unfortunately exactly what Stalker 2 is. I think what bothers me by far the most is what I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The fact that the early game of Stalker 2 objectively has far more content and clearly had a lot more effort put into it than the rest of the game. It almost makes me think that GSC did this intentionally by design so that reviewers and day one players who would realistically write their reviews based off their experience with the first couple of hours with the game would give Stalker 2 a much more positive rating than it deserved. I know I fell for this in my original review, which I've since privated the video for, because the reality of it is that that video isn't actually true in that I've played more of the game, and Stalker 2 both feels and plays like a totally different game once you leave the outer zone, and this has to be one of gaming's biggest tragedies, and dare I say borderline scams of this generation. Stalker 2 is what it is. I guess at this point I'll just have to stick to mods and older games made at a time when it wasn't all about flashy trailers and when developers still cared. Maybe in a few years when modders have had their time with Stalker 2, it'll become something amazing. But right now, it's lackluster. With the modding scene though, I sincerely hope Stalker 2 doesn't just become Gamma 2, as Anomaly and Gamma are for some silly reason the most popular Stalker mods to date, but that's a topic for another video. Another video that I made a few weeks ago, so check that one out, link on the screen if you're interested. Leave a like on this video if you ended up enjoying, and tell me how your experience went with Stalker 2 if you've played it. I'm sorry to make such a negative video like this, I really didn't want to. Generally, negative coverage is something I reserve for the current state of Halo because, well, we all know how Halo's doing these days. But yeah, I couldn't ignore this any longer. I had to call it out. I wanted this game to be great, but sadly it's just not. Oh well. Back to IWP for me. Thanks for watching, and get out of here. Never mind. Just doesn't have the same ring to it. Goodbye.